Okay, welcome back. Today we're just going to keep it light, and this will be more of a video about altering and some light fixes as opposed to creating an entire outfit. So what happened was that where Randy and I are planning to go to a show tonight in support of the arts. As we were picking out what we wanted to wear, Randy thought it would be good. This is one of his favorite vests. It fits him really well. It's nice and long since he's a taller guy. The only problem is we pulled it out of the closet and found a little bit of an issue. We were wearing it and this cincher band. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. This is a brand new vest. He's worn it once. So we don't know at what point this happened. I would like to think that I would have noticed if he were wearing it and this cincher band had pulled and gripped this seam. Fortunately, it is on a seam, so it's a nice clean rip, and it'll be a pretty easy fix. I'll use the invisible stitch today. Tuck in all of this frayed part on the edge, which seems to suggest that this fabric is too delicate for certain kinds of stitches, and depending on how fast fashion this vest is, something tells me that the machine stitches may be a little too wide for such a delicate fabric. So this happens quite a bit on clothes when the seams come apart like this, and you can see the frayed edge. The frays here are very long, and it just clearly it came apart at the seam and just tore this entire edge to shreds. That's where you see this kind of fraying when the stitches cannot hold on a certain fabric. So before I stitch, I may go in and solidify these frays just to ensure that it doesn't fray any further with some fabric glue. I think I still have some fabric glue around here somewhere, so I'll see what I can do about that. Another cheat I like to use if I can't find fabric glue is clear nail polish. So we'll see what we can do about solidifying this edge before we go back in and resew, because once I resew, there's still that risk of this coming apart again. It's just some fabrics are too delicate and they're just made to do this. Another issue he has with the vest are these buttons. They're brown. Brown on gray is, I mean, technically they're both neutral, so yes, they match technically. That doesn't make it pleasing to look at. Brown on gray is very dull, it's very ugly and blah. And Randy is not a blah kind of person. He is a bard. He has a colorful personality, and he likes his clothes to illustrate that. So we have some new buttons we're going to put onto the vest as well. So these buttons are very common. They're nice cheap buttons, so when you're dealing with mass manufacturing, the manufacturer will do what they can to save money. And a common cheap button is a good way to cut cost. But here in this house, we don't cut corners. So we're going to replace all of these buttons as well. So we'll get to the mending first, and then after that, we're going to sew on all new buttons to the front. Nice, easy little day. It'll take a few hours. We still need to keep our eye on the clock because we have a show tonight, but I think I can do it. Let's get started. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen up this tighten strap and just kind of help alleviate the stress on the seam before we go in and sew it. So And this is the tiniest size needle I have. And when I sew, I'm going to make sure the stitches are as tiny and as tight as possible. So I'm going to go in through the rip, under the seam, and we're going to start at the point where the seam is still intact, just as far at the beginning as possible. Just make sure that the intact part of the seam still connects to the repaired part of the seam. Nice and tight. We're going to keep the stitches as close to the seam as possible. That's the beauty of the invisible stitch. So once we get to the fray, there we go. So we're approaching the fray now. So here we go. Now we're at the fray. So now that we're at the fray, here we're going to be a little liberal with how close we are to that fray, because the closer we are to the fray, the more likely that fray will come undone again. So we're going to give it some generous allowance. I'm going to fold it over, and I think what I want to do is sew this down first before I get to the invisible part of the stitch. We're going to go across and sew all of this down. It'll make it easier to sew once we come back through to the repair. So we're going to go across the frayed edge first and just secure this down, tuck under that damage, and make sure it has some reinforcement before we go back through and repair the seam. There we go. So now that that's folded over, it's nice and straight. This will make it easier for us to repair it without having to fight with those frays and keep them tucked under. So they're already sewed down, they're tucked under, they're not going anywhere. And now we can work on repairing this seam. So again, we're going to go past the rip, and we're going to start back here where the seam is still intact. So begins, and we're just going to go across now and make sure that this is nice and repaired. So the thing about the invisible stitch, you should know, it's more simple than you think it is. It's basically a running stitch reversed. You're just approaching this very simple stitch from the other side. This is all it is. So we're just going to go down, across, down, across. And if we were approaching this from the inside of the garment, which is usually how you sew a seam, this would really just be the mechanics of a basic running stitch. But since we're approaching this from the outside, we're just making the moves in a different way. It's quite easy. This half of the seam is now complete. Now we have the strap. So what I'm going to do here is sew across, but I'm again going to give it quite a bit of allowance. I'm going to see if I can get this to overlap here instead of like right at the edge. We're going to make this overlap and give it some extra reinforcement that way, and just make sure that these edges and the new seam, make sure it's not right on the edge, so we don't risk it fraying all over again. So we're going to give it allowance. We're going to sew into a little farther into the band and make sure that this whole seam, that this part overlaps with the band, and just make sure that sits nice and strong, because it's this tightening band that caused this rip in the first place. There was too much stress on the tightening band and it pulled at the seam and everything just fell apart because of this doing its job, basically. So we're going to just make sure that that has as much of a fighting chance as possible so that this doesn't happen again. And continue down the seam. So once we're done with the seam, I'm going to make a few more passes. Just going to do as many passes as possible, and I do this quite a bit when I'm hand sewing. I'll go over a seam more than once, just make sure it's nice and tight. And there we go. Nice repaired seam. It is a little puckered, but I had to give it some generous seam allowance, so you can, unless you're really paying attention, but you can almost tell like where the pattern just kind of changes. But that's okay, as long as it stays put this time. Okay, so these are the buttons that Randy has picked out for the vest. It was this part is, it was a 4-pack of Irish themed buttons. Nice and couture-y, but there were only the 4, and this is a 5-button vest. So I did have one of these left over from another project. The only problem is it's just the one. I think if I had more of these, that these would be the ones that we just sew on throughout. But if I can find more of these in the future, I may just take these off and replace them with this and just have this be a consistent button throughout the vest. That would look very cool. But for now, there's only just the one, and then we have the 4-pack of the Irish buttons. So for now, this will do. So what Randy said is that this one should be on the bottom. And then these, he wanted the top one to be a clover, so that will be this. And then just rearrange these other 3 in the middle accordingly. Maybe the horseshoe would be the second to last. Okay. So I'm already seeing a problem with this horseshoe because the clover, if we're reading it by the clover, that would indicate that the horseshoe makes this arch around the clover, but the point of that horseshoe is that it's always supposed to be in positioned this way, but this way it makes the clover upside down. So this is, this was obviously a gimmicky 4-pack of buttons, and I didn't really think too much about the actual accuracy.
It's supposed to point up, so the good luck stays in the shoe.
For the sake of accuracy, I'm going to keep it this way because that is the point of a horseshoe. Even though this makes the clover look upside down, I would rather the clover be upside down than the horseshoe. That's just silly. So, that being silly, we'll make this the second to last button. And we'll make a lucky the second button. The second clover will be in the middle. The inaccurate horseshoe will be the second to last. And then the coat of arms button will be on the bottom. So the reason I haven't pulled the loose threads from the old button is because it makes a good marker where the button used to sit and where the new button should go. So as soon as I have this button positioned, then we're going to pull the threads out. And so now that the button is positioned correctly, we're going to make sure that this clover is well positioned, and we're just going to sew it in place now. So when sewing a button, there should be a grand total of 6 passes. So if it's a button with 2 holes, or a button with a backing like this one, you sew it down 6 times, make 6 rounds. If it's a 4-hole button, then you pass across, or depending if you like the cross style or the straight style, you pass 2 of the buttons 3 times and the other 2 buttons 3 times. So we're doing 6 passes with this backing. Just make sure it's nice and tight. When sewing on this button, I keep the stitches in the back as close to each other as possible, which is why I'm just taking my time here. Make sure it passes through the fabric first, and then I put it through the holes. It comes out the other end, and then back through the fabric. So, okay, so now that that's done, what we're going to do is pass under 3 times. Just like that. We're making sure that this is nice and tight underneath. Just like that. And then back through the fabric once more. And through the back again. And then we're going to finish it off. And that's one. So we have 5 more buttons to go.
The channel, like and subscribe. Isn't that what YouTube wants us to say? Our Lords and Master of Google. Yeah,